Today's episode is sponsored by Jam.dev. It's developer-friendly bug reports in 2 clicks. It's free and it's fabulous. You're a dev, you work on a team, maybe your team sends you bug reports with no details, maybe text, no screenshot, no console logs, and you end up going back and forth just to get the repro. That's when we introduce Jam.dev. It's a free tool that saves developers a ton of frustration. It'll force your teammates to make the perfect bug report. They literally can't do it wrong because it automatically includes a video of the bug, console logs, network requests, all the information you need, even their network speed. It's super easy to use. It works in Chrome. It works in Edge. They see a bug, they click a button, it makes a ticket, it saves time for them, and it'll save you a lot of hopping on calls and meetings to debug. If you're an engineer and you'd rather spend your time writing code than responding to comments, send your team jam.dev. And for the Hansel Minutes listener, take a look at jam.dev/Scott. Get started with your first year completely free. That's jam.dev/Scott. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Shanea Leven, who's the co-founder and CEO of CodeSee. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. So I've been checking out CodeSee. Folks can look at it at codesee.io. And here's the thing. I don't know how to describe it. And I've been working with software for such a long period of time. It almost feels like a new category. So I kind of want to understand that, but then I want to back up and figure out how you got here. So what is CodeSee to start with?
Yeah. So do you know how understanding code has always been really hard?
Well, it's like pulling teeth, right? You sit down, you stare at the new code base, and you kind of go, where's the docs? Where's the Visio diagram?
Exactly. So CodeSee is a manifestation of how do you understand how all of your code works. It's a platform that's a code understanding platform. So you can actually understand how all of the pieces at any layer of your code base works throughout the SDLC. So in yesteryear, we used to have these manual diagrams that we would have to draw ourselves, maintain, that are not connected to the code. They're out of date as soon as the code changes. And CodeSee is basically a fix of all of that. And by being able to understand all of our code, we actually get a chance to fix all of these inherent problems that have been previously hard before, like debugging, refactoring, getting productivity. I don't know if you know this, but we spend 30 to 60% of our time trying to understand not only how, if I make a change, what happens, what's the impact of that change, but also where do we go from here? Where is the answer to my question? And that's what CodeSee solves.
Interesting. Now, you talk about diagrams. I remember 20 plus years ago when UML came out, we even had a full-time person for the time who was updating the Unified Modeling Language diagrams and just trying to keep them in sync.
Yeah. And it sucks. It's really hard, particularly as our code bases have morphed over the last, 10 to 15 years with the advent of microservices and all of these different repositories and different third-party services and API calls that we're integrating with. It's a mess. And so the answer to your question might be at the high level. It might be between repositories. It might be at the function level. It might be, within the repository. It might be in the PR you just shipped. And so we need to be able to handle all of those cases. I also don't know if you know this, but everybody writes their code in a weird, sometimes it doesn't follow best practices. And sometimes, this person left and I have no idea how this person wrote the code. And so there's all these inherent things that if we could just give ourselves the mental models of how our code works, we don't have to create the mental models ourselves. It would save us so much time and pain and effort.
Yeah, I think we try to solve some of those problems around how people write code by having editor config and things like that. So that gets at least looks similar. And then at least I work in the .NET space. And I know other languages have this as well, which are, analyzers that run post compilation or pre-compilation that will say, well, I want your functions to be camel case, or I want your functions to be Pascal case. But that's just kind of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It doesn't
Right.
actually, it makes it look tidy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will understand it easier.
That's right. So we think about, some of the things that linters are very, very important for standardization. And we think about how do we have all of these different assets to make sure that we're all following the same rules. But how do you know when I change something over in file A, I absolutely need to change file B? How do I know that if I change this, it's going to cause a performance degradation? Like if I do all of these other things here, how does that make my life better or worse? Does that
Yeah.
actually impact the feature, the new feature that has just been imagined? How do I ship that thing and make sure it works? Those are the things that we're trying to solve.
I like that you point out the future of what we're trying to do, because that makes me think about like the concept of the butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in this country, and then there's a hurricane in that country, and that means that this line of code or that function gets renamed, and then 5 years from now, who knows what ramification that's going to have, and that's going to be a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, you have code base maps, and I'm signed up for CodeSee, and I've got actually the podcast website being looked at via CodeSee. And I noticed that there's the map of the code base itself, which is very granular. We're talking about function level stuff. Then there's how this file relates to that file, how this class relates to that class. But you've also got service mapping.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think about like what level of altitude, I guess, would be the way I would think about it, that the average developer wants to look at versus maybe an enterprise person might want to be at a different altitude?
Yeah. So if you have a personal project or an open source project, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be at the lowest level, the function level, or just a single repository. The complexity really lies when you start to have multiple repositories, when you start to have all of the different services, third-party services, API calls, you're having things at scale, that your question can be literally at any layer. So if your question is, and who knows when that question is going to be at each layer, right? I have no idea from a platform perspective when I'm going to need to answer, oh, this API call is, being slow, or this function needs to change all of these other templates. You have no idea. So we've had to build the platform to be able to easily allow the developer at any point to traverse any layer and see how all of that is connected, because all the developer cares about is, can you answer my question quickly? And that's what matters.
And we're also really familiar with how to like edit our code and run around in our editor. We're not necessarily familiar with how your visualization is going to work. I wonder if you find that challenging. Like, am I going to switch between VS Code and some website, or can I stay in VS Code and just bounce between different ways to think about the code?
It's definitely more of the latter. So as the platform develops, we're actually bringing more and more of those layers directly into the editor. So you can go up levels in the editor specifically. So you never, ever have to leave.
That's cool. So I can stay where I'm comfortable, because a lot of these tools force you into their website. But if I have an extension and I can spend that time in Visual Studio Code, that's going to be more comfortable.
That's exactly right. We've had to think about both the editor and the web, because eventually you're going to start sharing things, right? Eventually you're going to want some of this knowledge to reside in a place where anybody can get to it. And let's say, God forbid, that like you have to leave the organization one day, your future colleagues or even your future self, I don't remember what I wrote 6 months ago, right? I'm going to have to be able to access that in a scalable way. And whenever we create a diagram, we try our very best to make sure that as you all ship new code, we keep that diagram up to date. And so we first started that on the web, and now we're bringing it closer and closer to the editor. So we need to be able to traverse all of those different layers.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of layers, in fact, I have seen, mapping programs before, and usually they'll end up making a square for each function or each file, and then they'll start drawing lines with arrows. And when I started, when my code base with CodeSee, I have to admit, I said, oh, okay, it just build a map. And then I thought I was basically done. I was like, oh, this is kind of cute. But then I noticed layers, and I could go and say, here are the engineering hotspots. Here's the latest activity. And suddenly a dimensionality was added. And I realized that that's where this went from being a simple mapping tool to being something I would actually use. And I guess I'm just more of a compliment, because I dismissed it as, oh, it just drew boxes and lines. But then it turned into like a data mining tool.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you. I take that as a compliment. Our platform is not meant to just map code. It's meant to help you understand your code. And so when we're trying to ship a new feature, we're trying to fix a bug, or it's 2 a.m, you've got an incident going on. There's so many other things that run through your mind as a developer, whether that's like, where was this latest commit, or how does this impact, or even when you're onboarding, like, where are all the changes starting from? How do I prioritize this stuff? And so you need all of those different things. Sometimes you need code knowledge that's not located in your code. Like, if I change a route, what are the best practices that I follow? What are all the gotchas that I'm about to stumble over? And so we need a place for that, because you're not going to write it in the code. You're not going to put it in a comment. We need a place to basically have all of that knowledge that's not stale documentation, that lives in correlation and conjunction with the actual code itself. It's not separate. It's intimately intertwined.
Maybe this is an implementation detail, but then it makes me wonder, like, where does this knowledge live? Is it in some database at CodeSee? Is it in a dot folder? Is it in some serialized format? Because years ago, it lived in a Word document that, to your point, never gets updated, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe people would check in the Word document or the Visio document, but where does all this knowledge live? Because I could imagine it living somewhere in a single repository, but at the enterprise level, I wouldn't know where to put it.
Yeah. So right now it lives in 2 places, either on the CodeSee platform or in your editor. And you can take that link of the map, because it will keep itself up to date, and you can toss it anywhere you want. We've also had different hooks into the developer process. So like, we put an image on the body of your PRs to make that easier, right? We've integrated it directly into like GitHub, so that no matter where you are, all of that knowledge is at your fingertips or just one click away. I've always hated not having developer platforms built into my workflow, as I've been in DevTools for 12 years. And so like, we've tried really, really hard to make it one click away from getting that value that you need, without slowing down your code repository or slowing down I need to commit new code to this repo.
Yeah, and you do point out that you've been in DevTools for a while. You worked at Lob, you worked at Docker, you worked at Cloudflare, you worked at Google for 4+ years.
Yeah.
Did at some point at one of these companies, did you say this is a problem, and then you became so frustrated that you stopped working in big tech and decided to do your own thing?
I did. That's exactly how it happened. I was working at Docker, actually. We were trying to ship this feature that me and the team had spent 6 months trying to ship. And 2 days before the launch, there was a bug. And much like today, unfortunately, Docker had gone through some team changes. And those members of the team that knew that area of the code base were no longer at Docker. And they didn't leave any documentation. They didn't leave anything. And it was a very, very urgent, critical bug. So long story short, we spent 2 days trying to fix it before the launch. And we just ended up deciding that actually we needed a month to read all of the code line by line, make sure that if we change this, that we didn't cause any downstream catastrophic effects before we shipped this thing. And we didn't have a month. And so the feature just didn't get shipped. And that happened all the time. We have all of these sayings around, oh, well, we don't know what we don't know until we get in there. Or we have an estimate, and then that estimate blows up to 2x or 3x or 5x because of some unknown. And that's just kind of part of the territory. That's just what we deal with, because we've never had tools to be able to say, oh, how does this actually work when I'm unfamiliar? That's not anybody's fault. It's not you're a bad developer. It's we have so much code now. It's monstrous how much code we have. And there's just not enough hours in the day to read it all line by line.
Speaking of there not being enough time,
Yeah.
There's the initial impression I got when I installed this on my podcast base.
Mhm.
But then I noticed that there's this concept of tours, which I thought was really clever. So it's like I could just dump someone and say, hey, here's a diagram, and then they could go and explore. And you can do that. So now that I have familiarity, I could see where the engineering hotspots are, who's committed. I can basically apply heat maps, for lack of a better word, on top of this thing. But if I am onboarding a new team member, I don't want to just throw them into the pool. I want to give them a complete tour of that space. How do these tours work?
They work exactly like you just said. You put a Tor point on a particular node or a particular line of code, and you can actually step someone through asynchronously or in real time exactly what you want them to know, how you want them to know it, in the order that you want them to know, so they don't have to create that stumbling point that we all go through. And it doesn't necessarily have to be onboarding a new team member. This could just be you switched teams. This is just an area you've not worked in before, right? A platform team could leave another Tor point for another team that's interacting with that platform, right? So there's a lot of use cases where we're talking about getting on the same page about the code that, who knows, we might take a vacation and that person is no longer available to walk us through, or they don't have time to take a meeting with us. I could drop a couple Tor points and anybody in the future can just get a walkthrough of that area.
I was trying to think about how I do that now, and I do it with like Camtasia. Like I'll basically like make a video, and somehow the idea of like dropping a 30-minute video on someone is like exhausting, both in the making of the video, but also in the forcing them to like watch it. It's linear. They would not be able to run around.
Exactly. And also it's not connected to the thing that you're trying to teach them, which is the code.
That's a good point. But with a code tour, I can literally say, oh, show the connected files. And I don't have to like do it in a linear fashion. I can wander around and then return to the step in the tour.
Exactly.
I want to welcome Partner Hero, the Hansel Minute sponsor family. They provide customer service outsourcing that's built for the needs of scaling and high growth startups. Partner Hero offers flexible terms, fast onboarding, and the ability to scale teams quickly, which is perfect for fast-growing businesses. In my experience, outsourcing tends to have a bad reputation as being exploitative and low quality, but Partner Hero's values-based approach will raise the bar for the outsourcing industry by investing in employee empowerment and focusing on career growth. They pay above-market salaries, and they maintain a focus on quality and performance. They also offer these flexible terms for you to scale quickly, which is perfect for startups. They bake quality assurance into every program, and they have offices around the world, so they can provide a truly global coverage. That means onshore, nearshore, and offshore. Outsourcing has long been available to big enterprise businesses, but Partner Hero is challenging the business as usual and bringing those benefits to startups. Short, flexible contracts, fast ramp-up times, values integrity, and expertise. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your startup that feels like it's a part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/HanselMinutes. You can book a free consultation with their solutions team, mention you heard about Partner Hero from Hansel Minutes, and they'll waive the setup fee. Do you all use this, like this CodeSee developed with CodeSee?
100%, without question. Oh yeah. It's awesome. We actually have a channel dedicated to it to make sure that we are not only talking about it, or if we do try to develop with CodeSee and something's missing, we have the ability to make sure that we are able to like move the product forward that way. Everybody at the company right now has been in developers tools for a while, or is very passionate about developer tools. And so we absolutely dog food CodeSee for sure.
Now, I'm a .NET developer, and I didn't have any trouble running around here in .NET, but I'm curious how you deal with like diverse code bases. Like, are you mostly focused on TypeScript and JavaScript, and then you have like a long tail of other languages, or where do you see your ability to basically handle any kind of language? Because someone could throw Rust or Erlang in there, and I don't know if you'd be able to handle it.
We have 11 languages right now.
Oh.
Yeah. JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, Go, Rust, Python, Kotlin, C#.NET. And our newest language, we're working on Ruby. We're in the process of working on PHP. So like, it's always going to be a diverse process. There's always going to be code-based diversity. This kind of comes with the territory of building something technologically hard with analyzing people's code. I think that just kind of is a thing.
And the analysis, like how are you doing all this parsing? I'm just trying to think about how I would go and develop it. Whenever, how you use a tool and then you're like, how would I do this?
We do it one at a time. We do use some parsers. We do take advantage of the language servers.
Ah, the language servers. Okay, that makes sense.
And then on top of that, we then add our own secret sauce based on all of the 3 years of development that we've done, because usually the out of the box tools are not enough, which is why something like this has never existed before, because it's
Right.
just not enough.
Yeah. I mean, and you're handling compiled languages, uncompiled languages, strongly typed languages, loosely typed languages, all those kind of things. But the language servers that are available on something like VS Code are a good place to start, because it's kind of like a free Lexer and Yacker that you have available
Exactly.
to understand the DOM.
Yeah. And then sometimes we always kind of set the expectation with customers that if you've got a particularly legacy code base, or, if the team over the course of a decade hasn't followed best practices, that something might not work immediately out of the box. There's something that we might have missed. And then we just handle those cases. But that usually makes the entire ecosystem better.
When you got started in tech, how did you learn code bases? I would lock myself in a room and just read and stare and rub my temples until it popped.
Yeah, I took a lot of courses. I got a lot of help in Stack Overflow. I got a lot of forum help. I was not shy about asking questions publicly in forums.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of banged my head against the wall, and a lot of tears, so many tears. I think for me, I have the saying that I've said before, which is, I think the measure of how good I was getting at coding was how little I cried that day. That was my measuring stick.
Yeah, staring at a code base and wondering, am I going to get this? But then, of course, there's also the work that happens in your brain when you're asleep, or when you're in the shower, or when you go for a walk, and then it clicks. Was visualization important to you? Because I've heard that, with a lot of people, there's different kinds of learning styles: visualizing learners, kinesthetic learners, auditory learners. Why a graph? Why a visual representation and not just a textual one?
It was always really important to me. It still is. I drew a lot of tables. I drew a lot of analogies, a lot of visual analogies. For some reason, I remember in particular I really struggled with the concept of this. And I couldn't get it. And we had a visual analogy of an ice cube and an ice cube tray. And that this was the ice cube, the instance of one of the templates that I made. And it was just those visual analogies were really helpful for me to be okay, which one's the ice cube and which one's the tray? And so I think that was really, really helpful for me. And also I use a lot of that now when I'm teaching others, right? And teaching, all different types of people about how code works and et cetera, when we're talking to other stakeholders and organizations, et cetera.
One of the things, you have a section here called engineering hotspots, who's doing a lot of commits, who's doing a lot of work in this space. But there is a community and a series of developer tools that does code complexity. There's a lot of well-known metrics like cyclomatic complexity, giving a sense of how hard or how sophisticated code is. Where do you think those things apply in the SDLC, and whether or not CodeSee will implement things like cyclomatic complexity analysis within telling me that this is scary code or this is not scary code?
Yeah, we're definitely always adding new metrics and new things to think about when it comes to understanding new insights. We are now going to start moving that to our AI functionality, though.
Okay. That's interesting, because I wanted to understand where you saw AI coming in this space. Because I know that Copilot, people are using it to summarize the TLDR of what's going on in this code base. But that creates prose, and the Copilot doesn't really know how the code works. I'm curious where you see an AI, because if I can talk to somebody, maybe a code tour could become an interactive code tour where I could talk to a person that's not really there.
Exactly. So that's kind of where we're going with this. There's definitely a place for autocomplete, right? Auto-completing all of these different things. But when you're trying to understand, onboard, get the impact of, you do need some of the more detailed code analysis. And then that chat interface is enhancing that experience. So we use a combination of code analysis, AI, and visualizations, because you're still, even if you were to chat with your code base, you still need to consume that mental model, right? And so you really do need a combination of all of those.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I feel myself, and I'm not a hater, but I'm a little bit of a pessimist, because I feel like people are just throwing stuff at very large language models and hoping that understanding will come out.
Yeah.
But all it's doing is intuiting almost what's going on. But lines of code, coupling, complexity, churn, these are all literal metrics with real numbers that can be applied to code. Once those were calculated, then I could maybe have a conversation about it. But I feel like you need to spelunk into classes, modules, packages, and figure out those numbers. Will CodeSee then plug into other things like GitHub Actions? And if I have an analysis tool, I could feed that information back into the platform.
That's definitely something we've talked about for sure. I think we've got a lot on our plate right now as far as analyzing in AI and all of those different things. And once we get that, then integrations become the easy part.
At the very, very beginning of the conversation, you brought up first thing, software development lifecycle. Like that acknowledgement of that developer's inner loop and then the team's outer loop. It sounds like that is a focus.
Yes, 100%. Our only goal, our mission is to help developers master the understanding of code bases. Like that's it. Just help developers understand what the heck's going on in all of the cases that they need to help them understand what's going on.
Where would the business leader or the engineering manager sit versus the line programmer?
Oh, they need to understand it just as much, right? If you think about it from a business perspective, particularly in a SaaS company or even in new AI companies, right? Like the ability to have this asset, the code, is the prize. It is the asset that you're betting the future on. And so if you don't have a way to analyze it and understand it at a moment's notice, if your engineering manager or leader, if you don't have a handle on how all of this code fits together and how do you morph an organization or make sure that your team is happy, make sure that you can deliver on whatever your goals are, delivering value to customers at a moment's notice, even though you don't have your hands in the code every day, that's still your mandate, right? If you don't have a tool, then you create this anxiety feeling, right? I have no control over this because I didn't spend 6 months reading all the code line by line. And CodeSee in that case is actually even more valuable. We're finding a lot of heterogeneous teams where like you might have the designer, you might have a PM, or you might have a QA or compliance or operations organizations or program management that's like, I need to understand something around this, but I don't understand code. What am I supposed to do? And a visual, a model is something that we can all rally around and talk about and point to and all of those different things. And so having that single mental model for anybody to be able to see is really valuable.
I really like that you called out something that I don't think enough people call out about code is anxiety over the code, fear of the code. I've used this idea that if I'm afraid of the code, then what tool am I going to use to fix that fear? For me, it's historically been unit testing, code coverage. If I'm afraid to touch it, then I have two choices. I can either really, really understand it, or I can just put a fence around it with as much testing as possible until my fear subsides.
Right.
And then when the automated build for me is just validation of like, oh, you're going to be okay. It's totally fine. Everything is cool. You've built automation in as well to try to avoid that fear.
Yeah. And so like the thing is that at any point, any change that you make is inherently a little anxiety producing, right? How do I know that this PR that I'm about to push is not just going to bring the whole system down or create a security incident or cause us multiple millions of dollars? And we don't. The truth is that we don't, unless we have a tool of discovery to make sure that we can confidently dig up all of those unknown unknowns.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know. I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, or I don't know what I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so folks can go to codesee.io and just try it for free with public repositories. So I did the same thing. I logged into GitHub and it went in and it mapped the whole Hansel Minutes code base. I can go and look at review maps, give PRs and stuff to people, and they can look at their code reviews. I can do automations, do visualizations, all free to try out. So it's pretty cool stuff. And folks can do that today, right?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure getting a chance to chat with you. This has been awesome.
Oh, I appreciate you as well. We have been chatting with Shanea Leven, talking about CodeSee and visualizing our code. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.